Abuji, Abuji, Abuji.
Today, we will focus on the book that has been written by Vaibhav Porandre. We will be talking about his book, Hitler and India. This book probably will tell you uh, some of the latent or the suppressed facts about Nazis' attitude towards India. The discussion is now going to be held by Amandeep Sandhu, in his own right, a very good writer who has done two novels so far, the Sepia Leaves and the Roll of Honor. Over to Amandeep Sandhu, please.
Thank you so much, sir. So lovely to see you after so long. you know. Hi, Vaibhav. Uh, uh,
Hi, Amandeep.
you have a lovely painting behind you. I love the colors of it. Wish I could.
Not part of the Nazi stolen art.
So let me start our evening on a slightly personal note. I shared it with you. And I was a few years back, I was in a fellowship in Germany. And you make German friends, and and that as a nation, for the last 60, 70 years, Germany has been dealing with, what is the Nazi era, the Hitler's rise. In fact, it gave rise to a huge school of psychotherapy later on in the 60s. It has been a generational setback, many generations, I think. And yet, when I was there, and one evening we were with a nice German friend I have, we were bar hopping, and we are talking about politics. We are talking about, at that point, the German right wing was rising. He was very disturbed by it. And at like around 2:30, 3 o'clock, by the third or fourth bar we were drinking beer in, I finally burst out to him. I said, Philip, I understand your grief. I understand, what has happened in your history. But you see, I am a brown man. For me, the Second World War was basically a war about colonization. It wasn't a war about ethics and morals. When you call the Nazi and the hit Germany the axis, you actually were saying it's axis of evil. But for me, it was like, how good are the British? I mean, British have screwed us so many times over. And during the Second World War, we know what Hitler did with 4.3 million people dying through famine in India. I said, it doesn't make sense to me. He took great offense at it because, he couldn't get under my skin. But when I was reading your book, I clearly felt that you stand outside the debate of right and wrong. So I will come to my question presently, but the fact is that if you chose to work on the subject, if you spend, as you say in your acknowledgement, 10 years researching this, then your stance is completely clear. And yet you never in the book take a position to say he was right, he was wrong, this was good, that was wrong. I see it personally as a great virtue of being a journalist, which is what you are by profession. But the question that I want to ask you comes from Preeti, who will, I hope, join us while you answer, is that what made you pick this subject? Why did you work on a book called Hitler and India?
Thank you, Amandeep. And thanks for the very nice introduction. It's a very interesting question. Why did I choose this subject to write about? Some 10 years ago, I started reading Hitler's autobiography, which is extremely popular in India and a perennial sort of bestseller. And when I was more than halfway through the book, I suddenly found that there was this passage in the text which was about India. And when I read that passage, I was completely taken aback because it was not merely critical, it was abusive. And it surprised me. for a variety of reasons. In India, we have this assumption that because Hitler fought against the British in the Second World War, and because Subhash Chandra Bose met him in Berlin seeking his help for Indian independence, the fight for Indian independence, Hitler must have been a supporter of India's freedom struggle. And here was definitive proof in Hitler's own autobiography that he wasn't a supporter of India's freedom struggle. Not only has he written about India's freedom struggle and the validity of it in the autobiography, but he has been pretty abusive about India and the Indian people as well. And that is the reason I was startled. And I asked myself that Mein Kampf is a bestseller in India. I see it in practically every bookstore I go to. I'm sure all of us do. So have the Indians who have all read this book come across this passage about India? Have they read it? I asked a lot of people around, and I was surprised to find out that none of them had actually come across this part of that text. The reason for it, I assume, is that nobody really gets to that part of the text because the book is so rambling and parts of it are so totally outdated that if you do not really explain the context in which he's saying things, you simply don't follow the line of thinking often. And he takes names and he talks about incidents about which there is very little familiarity at this point in time. So a lot of it is lost on the readers. The prose is very slow moving and it's very, very dry and rambling. So my assumption is people really don't get to that part. My fortune or misfortune that I had got to that part. Once having got there and having made this discovery, I asked myself, was there more to it? Or was this everything? Had Hitler spoken at any other time about India, I would never have believed that Hitler had India on his consciousness at all. But I thought, let me check. And the more I checked in the archives, it made me look into the archives. I looked into the German archives, the Indian archives, the British archives, and there was a surprising amount of material on the subject. What I found to my surprise again was that Hitler had right through his career, right from his days when he was a struggling politician and orator in Munich's beer halls. He used to stand on top of the table and address the gathering in the beer hall. Right from that time, he had been speaking about India, Indians, Indian culture and civilization, India, particularly in relation to the British Raj. And he starts talking about India at the very start of his political career and talks about it right through his career, up until almost until his suicide in a bunker in Berlin. So when his political star starts rising, he talks about it in his speeches, in his writings. Then there is the autobiography that I mentioned about which is written between the years 1924 and 1926. Then in the early 1930s, just before he comes to power, he talks about India and British rule in India and what he thinks of the Indian struggle for freedom and the legitimacy of that struggle, whether the Indians are Aryans or not really Aryans. Then right through the power years, right through the years of the Third Reich, he makes these comments from time to time. And there is a pattern to those comments. And that pattern completely gave the lie to our assumption, to the common Indian assumption, that he was a supporter of the Indians, of their struggle for freedom, that he considered the Indians to be Aryans. The opposite is true. He considered Indians to be completely racially unfit and inferior. But we have this assumption because the word Aryan has its origin in Sanskrit. So we feel that, he may have thought that Indians are Aryans and they took the concept from here. The Nazi party also took the swastika and distorted it, of course, it distorted its shape, but nevertheless took the symbol. So that again has made us feel that perhaps they were sympathetic about India. They thought really the world of India. And this was a complete surprise. And it's interesting that you should mention, Amandeep, your conversation with a friend in London and in Britain and in Germany, that you really didn't care whether it was Germany or England. Now, when I was looking at this subject, I said to myself, now we as Indians are looking closely at the British Raj and our relationship with that Raj. Like you mentioned, Winston Churchill's policies, which led to the Bengal famine, in which more than 3 million people died. We are talking about Churchill's racism and the racism that the British Empire practiced. But do we ever talk about Hitler and his completely anti-India attitude? Do we even think for a moment that he was anti-India? And I realized then and there that while we have engaged with Churchill and the other racists in the British Empire, we haven't engaged with this question of the Nazis and Hitler at all. And there was a gap in history writing about this period. To my complete surprise, I came across evidence that a number of Indians were persecuted in Nazi Germany soon after Hitler came to power. They were thrown into prison, they were beaten up, they were imprisoned without a charge for days on end. Some of them were expelled from Nazi Germany. And all of this is there in my book. And so all of this I thought was an eye-opener, and I believed that it was time to write this book which would fill this acute historical gap that existed in the writing of Indian history. Now, this is a completely forgotten chapter from Indian history. India and the Nazis and their relationship with India, Hitler and his outlook towards India. And I felt that this gap needed to be filled. That's why I wrote this book.
Thank you so much. That was detailed and also almost an introduction to what we are talking about. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, but I have a flip question here, which comes up in your book itself.
Yeah.
That whether it was Indian leaders or it was universities, they kept even Bose, they kept requesting Hitler to delete those parts on India from the book.
Right.
From his biography.
Right.
Imagine if that had happened and you wouldn't have known what Hitler thought about India. Is that possible?
It's absolutely possible, but we are dealing with history as it exists at the moment. So as it turned out, Hitler was so sure about the racial inferiority of Indians and the worthlessness of their cause for freedom that he put his foot down, or rather his military boots down, and refused to delete those passages despite a number of requests from Indians and from very prominent, highly prominent Indian leaders, Bose the most prominent of them, of course. But we have many Indian student organizations writing to the Nazi leadership, to the German Foreign Office, and to Hitler himself, asking him to delete passages in Mein Kampf which are anti-India. We have Indians writing letters to the editor in various Indian newspapers saying that this guy seems to be totally anti-India. This is a worrying thing for us. And those letters are part of the Indian newspapers of that period. And somehow we developed this amnesia in the post-independence years and completely forgot this whole thing, that we had protested about these remarks of Hitler, that Bose and other Indians had protested, students had protested, and he had refused to delete those remarks.
No, in a way, good, he didn't delete them. You did the book on that. And
otherwise we would never have known, like you said, we would never have known what he really thought and felt about India.
Yeah. But the reason you reached that passage in my mind is because you're a persistent journalist,
Okay.
To spend 10 years on the book is also a mark of stamina, and one gets distracted. But now that we are on this, since we are building Hitler up, would you like to show how it was actually Neville Chamberlain who was Hitler's intellectual guru, in many ways, how for a long time Hitler actually aspired Germany to become like Britain, you know. And now that Germany had India and no, Britain had India and many other parts of the world, what did Hitler aspire for?
Yeah, Amandeep, certainly I'll do that. Now, Hitler took his ideas about India from 2, 3 people. The most prominent of them, like you mentioned, was Houston Chamberlain. He was a Britisher, but he was fascinated with the Germans and with German history. He was so fascinated that he abandoned his British citizenship and took up German citizenship. And he came to the conclusion after studying German history and parts of Indian history that the Nordic race, the white Nordic race, was the #1 race in the world. It was the superior race, and it had the right to rule over everybody else on the planet. And he came to the conclusion that some 1,500 years ago, these white Nordic Aryans, as he called them, had come to India galloping on their horses, which also presumably were white. He didn't tell us which color they were. And they had reached the height of learning and knowledge on the Indian subcontinent because there was a similarity in languages there. Now, by the way, this whole similarity between German and Latin and Sanskrit and all of that, this group of languages was established before Houston Chamberlain by a Britisher called William Jones. And that is where the whole Aryan theory came from. So William Jones it was who took the word Arya from Sanskrit and gave it to this group of languages and to these so-called people who believed were the common ancestors of these people who spoke these languages. So Houston Chamberlain takes this theory, picks it up, talks about the Aryans, the white Aryans coming to India and reaching the height of knowledge, but then somehow getting bastardized by mixing with the local population. And as a result of mixing with that local population, which in his eyes, was a population full of inferior people, these black and brown Indians, as he called them. They mixed with these Indians, according to him, and they lost their sense of Aryanness, and they lost their knowledge, and they lost their superiority.
Right.
And they lost their Aryanhood, so to say. So Hitler takes these ideas also from a French thinker called Arthur Gobineau. So from William Jones, Houston Chamberlain and Gobineau and others, all these other racialists, all these very strong racially minded academics. And he starts believing that the Germans are the Nordic people, the Aryans, who later went to the southern parts of the world, conquered them, but then lost their Germanness, so to say. Now, this theory made it very clear to Hitler that Indians had nothing to do with Aryanness. It was just a group of languages that was common, and because the Aryans had gone there, they had taken up Sanskrit and reached the height of knowledge with the use of that language and all of that. So the Indians, the brown people, were racially unfit people. They did not deserve to be mingled with, and certainly not mixed with. But because the white people had made this mistake, they had lost their rule over the world and lost their Aryanness. So Hitler's theory was completely based on the issue of race. He believed that the white man had the right to rule the world. And Britain was, of course, white man territory. And they were white people. So his conclusion was that Britain had every right to rule India and every right to rule other places on earth as well. They had every right to have colonies. Equally, Germany, and especially Nazi Germany, had a right to rule over other peoples and have colonies. And he was particularly fascinated with the British Raj in India, and he believed it to be a model and a template for Nazi Germany. He said at various points in his career, his highly controversial political and military career, and all of these instances I have cited in the book, his quotes, detailed quotes, that look at the British, here's a race of, just a few million people. There are some 2.5 million people there in India, and they rule over 400 million Indians. And that is because of their racial superiority. It's not because of their economic power. It's not because of social order. It's not because of the administrative system that they have set up there. That is because they have the right to rule over the Indians, because they are racially superior and the Indians are racially inferior. And he wanted to adopt this model and apply it to Germans' conquest of other territories. So he said very famously, and I have quoted this in my book as well, that Russia would be Germany's India. And he says it in so many words.
That's what I was getting.
Yeah. So that's a template he wants to follow. So he says, look at how they've established governors in these various places. So we will establish administrators like that. He talks about how they have, they have utilized India's resources, which utilize is another word for looting of India's resources, and used it to consolidate British power and to augment British power and prestige across the world. So we must do so similarly by annexing Russia and the Russian territories and Eastern Europe as a whole. But he also had some differences with the British Raj, in the sense that he said, they made a mistake by educating these Indians. Some of them thought that it was because of, Britain's civilizing mission, or merely because they wanted a group of people to help them with the administration. He was of the opinion that Nazi Germany should not make this mistake at all. Do not educate the native people. So there was a model to pick, and there was things to reject from there. And the things to reject were the good aspects of that rule. That we must be ruthless, we must be cruel. So India was a template for him. He was not a supporter of the Indian people. He said, and he writes in his autobiography, and I've quoted again and again from that book, that the Indian people will never win their freedom by fighting all by themselves against the British Raj. Unless they get external help, they will not get freedom because they're too weak.
Yeah, but Vaibhav, just a little sidetrack, and I mean, now perhaps, as I was surprised when I read the book, and perhaps people here are realizing that the Hitler that they are now hearing about is quite a different Hitler than what they might have imagined. I remember my Polish German couple friend, they were shocked. They were shocked when they came to India, and in bookstore after bookstore, they saw not only Mein Kampf, but they saw it selling right next to My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi, and they were like, what is happening here? And they were very stunned actually by that. But just a little, this thing that, as you say in the book, that it wasn't that everybody in Germany thought of India the way Hitler thought about it, right? In fact, like the propaganda minister, Goebbels himself was not so anti-India initially, or Strasser was not anti-India, So I know people should read the book to understand how, Hitler prevailed upon them and at what point Goebbels flipped and all that. But this Life of a Bengal Lancer was Hitler's sort of favorite movie. It's weird. To encounter these things. Coming back to the actual hero everybody has in mind, Subhash Chandra Bose, and I think we should keep the judgment of his role in history away from this discussion. That's a different matter. But I think he was heroic. He was earnest, really earnest. You know, he broke the British. They had kept him entrapped, and he escaped from there to Kabul, and he reaches back in Germany, and he just keeps. What I was amazed by is that he keeps trying and trying and trying to meet Hitler, and Hitler is not giving him an opportunity. This was shocking to me. Like for Bose's stature, not only as ICS, but then later Congress president. Then what happens with him here? How Gandhi actually sabotages his term. He is still a hero, and there he is not being given audience. Would you want to, without revealing so much about the book that people don't buy? See, it is very, very important book. It's by Westland. It costs not very much, but the money is not the factor. It's not very thick. It's not like my book. So it's a slim read and a very effectively edited book. Do buy it. Like here is the book. But Weber, a little about Bose.
Yeah, to start with, if I could talk about Strasser and company, since you mentioned that there were other Nazis who were not so unfavorably inclined towards India. In fact, there was a group of Nazis that was in favor of the colonized people, whether it was Indians or the others in the other colonized peoples in the world. And that was that particular wing of the Nazi party that focused more on the word socialist in the party's name. And Hitler, while he was leading this national German Socialist Workers' Party, emphasized more on the word national rather than socialist. And two broad factions emerged within the Nazi party. One which focused on the word national, led by Hitler, and the other by this Nazi leader called Gregor Strasser, who was even more respected than Hitler in parts of northern Germany at that time. And he was among the first Nazis to enter the German parliament. So Strasser and his brother, they run a number of Nazi publications. And from time to time, they write in favor of India. And Hitler is most upset about all of that. And there is this tremendous conflict that takes place within the party on the India issue and on the issue of the colonized peoples. And Hitler has this 7-hour marathon conversation with one of the Strasser brothers, where he explodes in anger. And that is part of my book, if you look at it. And Hitler eventually dominates the Nazi party, takes over the party, and the Strassers are systematically sidelined. And Goebbels is this perfect opportunist. He is recruited into the Nazi party by Strasser. He supports the Strasser wing of the party. He speaks up in favor of the colonized people. But when he sees that Hitler's political star is on the ascendant and Hitler is going to take over the party and not Strasser, and Hitler has this charisma that appeals to everybody, and he's this brilliant orator, he suddenly changes his tune and becomes anti-India. So that is, I have mentioned all of this and revealed a lot more detail in my book. So that's about the Strasser chapter. Now to get to Bose. Now Bose's story is a fascinating one because Bose is obsessed with the idea of India becoming free. Bose is interestingly also one of the earliest Indian leaders to protest very strongly against Nazi Germany and Nazi Germany's persecution of Indians and Indian students in Germany. And from 1933 onwards, the very year in which Hitler comes to power, he tries to seek a meeting with Hitler. Firstly, to tell him that he must delete all his anti-India remarks in Mein Kampf, because Germany is a rising power and wrong perceptions may spread across the world about Indians on account of what's written in that book. Then he protests to Hitler and other people about the treatment, the unjust treatment handed out to Indians in Nazi Germany. He says that I am extremely disappointed. He also asks organizations of Indian students studying in Germany to carry out protests against the Hitler regime in Nazi Germany in 1934-35, when Indians are being persecuted. So here is a man who is extremely aware of the negative aspects of Nazi Germany, is also totally aware that Hitler is essentially anti-India and looks up to the British and is desperately seeking an alliance with the British. But the advent of the war and the approach to the war changes everything. Bose is gradually sidelined in the Congress, because Gandhi more or less sabotages his second stint as the president of the Indian National Congress. And there are surprising twists and turns that happen. Now, we must remember when we look at Bose or even look at others, whether it's Gandhi or Savarkar or Golwalkar or Ambedkar and their responses to Nazi Germany and the British Raj, that Indian leaders were forever thinking of the British Raj, and for obvious reasons, because they had to think deeply about the Raj and their relationship with the Raj whenever they were negotiating and whenever they were considering alliances with other people in the world who might help Indians in their struggle for liberation from the British rule. And right through the 1930s, Hitler grows in power, his prestige increases, he increasingly has his way across Europe. In 1938, things come to a point where he takes a part of Austria. So Hitler takes Austria, he takes parts of Austria, he takes parts of Czechoslovakia, and suddenly the Munich Pact happens, and Hitler seems to be, just bulldozing everybody. And then the war begins, and when he takes Poland, though the British then declare war on Germany, Britain and France, we have this phase of the phony war where nothing much happens and Britain does not really attack Germany. So it is at this point when Hitler has become this very powerful leader who has taken on Britain in spite of his desire not to fight a war with Germany, with Britain. Bose feels that though the Nazi regime is altogether negative in its character, nature, approach, racism, and all of that, it could perhaps be used for a good purpose. And that purpose is the purpose of gaining freedom for India. And at first, let us remember one thing, that he does not approach Germany at first. He approaches Russia at first, because he is very clear in his mind that Russia is far more popular in India than Germany, and among Indians than Germany. And he also tells the Nazis when he goes to Berlin that Russia is looked at as a friendly force in India, but Germany is looked at completely negatively because of Hitler's anti-Indian comments and because of the overall negative attitude of the Hitler and the Nazis towards Indians. And he especially makes this very critical judgment of Germany when Hitler in 1941 suddenly attacks Soviet Russia. And then Russia joins the other bloc. Because Bose was all along hoping that Germany and Russia had joined hands at the start of the war and they might help us together against the British in our war for independence. And he felt that if Russia got involved, it would be looked at in an overwhelmingly positive way by the Indians. But this does not happen. And the more time Bose spends in Berlin and in other parts of Germany trying to meet Hitler, Hitler keeps him waiting for more than a year. He keeps making requests. Hitler keeps rejecting his request. Bose meets Ribbentrop twice to make the request that he be allowed to meet Hitler. Ribbentrop rejects that request twice. Bose also tells Ribbentrop and other Nazis that, please delete those remarks against India. They refuse to do that. Bose tells the Nazis that I need a declaration from the Axis powers in favor of Indian independence. Unless that declaration is obtained, I can't do much. And we must remember also that Bose was not very enthusiastic about starting the Free India Center in Berlin and elsewhere until and unless he had obtained that declaration in favor of Free India. And that enormously frustrated the Nazis because they wanted to use him for Nazi propaganda against Britain. Now that they had entered a war against Britain, in spite of their wishes, they wanted to use him for German propaganda. And Bose would refuse to do their bidding. Bose said, no, first give me a declaration, then I'll do the propaganda. So there is this constant negotiation happening, and Bose is getting increasingly frustrated. Then there are some very petty issues that the Nazis raise about Bose and his people and the expenditure which they are incurring in Germany and all of that. And a lot of it is completely unknown to us. We know that Bose went and met Hitler, but the enormously frustrating time that he goes through in those years that he spends in Germany, all of those experiences are mostly unknown to us. And even to those of us who are more or less familiar with the Bose story. So just to cite another example, the Nazis grow so frustrated and angry with Bose that he's not doing what they want him to do because they will not give him a declaration in favor of Indian independence, that they actually decide to have him shifted to a place like Switzerland so that, they can then deny if the British ask that, oh, no, he's not here. And they can patronize him. They can provide funds to the Indian Legion and other forces, but they can at the same time deny it. And, so it's only after much persuasion, actually after persuasion by Mussolini, that Hitler agrees to meet Bose. He does not agree to meet Bose on his own accord. It's because he feels insulted that Bose has met Mussolini before he has met him, that he finally agrees to call Bose. And even during the interaction that they have in Berlin or in East Prussia, we don't know where exactly the interaction happened. But what we know for certain is that the interaction definitely happened because there are detailed minutes of the meeting written by Hitler's interpreter. And there's the famous picture, which is etched in our memory, of Hitler and Bose joining hands. And that picture is one of the reasons why we believe that Hitler was a supporter of India's freedom. And Hitler spends most of the time talking to Bose and holding forth on a variety of subjects. And Hitler was a character who once if he started talking, he would not allow others to get even a word in. Interestingly, Stalin was a complete contrast. Stalin would keep completely quiet, like the perfect bureaucrat. And the bureaucratic machinery that he had set up in Soviet Russia. And, he would unsettle people with his silence, and Hitler would unsettle people with his non-stop talk. And he gives Bose all kinds of gratuitous suggestions about what to do with India, what he should do when he goes back home, and all of that. And at the end of it, he gives him nothing. It is a testimony to Bose's sense of integrity and his commitment to the cause of India that even in that meeting with Hitler in the year 1942, he brings up the issue of Hitler's anti-India remarks in Mein Kampf and tells him that he should delete those remarks. I mean, it required a lot of guts to do that because the World War was on. Bose was in Berlin. He was at the mercy of the Nazis. They could have killed him right then and there. But he does bring up the point. But he ends up completely frustrated because he gets nothing. He does not get a declaration in favor of India's freedom from Hitler, because Hitler refuses to give him that declaration. And Bose came to the conclusion that the meeting was a complete waste of time. So these are just a few things I've mentioned. There's a lot more in the book about Bose's interactions with the Nazis and how he really struggled there.
Sanjay sir, we'll come to you, but in a while. Let me ask a few more questions. I'd just like to read a little bit because there is, of course, a huge lot of literature now increasingly more popular by the Indian right wing, so to say, Golwalkar, Savarkar, and all that. But the book deals with it very interestingly. We'll have a little question on that later, but I'll just read out 4 or 5 lines towards this period when the war starts. That Savarkar, who was a defender of Nazi actions in Australia and Czechoslovakia, had joined the British war effort. Gandhi, whose heart was with Britain in such a conflagration, was veering towards beginning to a do and die stir and try to evict the Raj from Indian soil. Nehru, who wanted no role to play in such a stir, was being pulled in the direction Gandhi was dictating. And Bose, who had slammed both the Anschluss and the Sudetenland Gab, was seeking to be friends with the Nazis. So I find that fascinating how in one para you almost put the crossroads on which India was standing at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's
Yeah, but
fascinating. They were operating in a certain context, and their decisions changed, depending on the context, and especially in the context of the World War.
yeah, but of course we must mention that swastika was taken from Tibet and not from India. Professor Gurupesh mentioned the
Yes, of
Himalayan.
course.
I
Yes, of
found
course.
that fascinating how chapter 7 starts. You basically put a red herring there. In fact, I loved how the book starts. The book starts with the disappearance or the abduction of somebody called Nambiar. You must read the book to know who he is. And I'm like, wow. It was almost like a crime story. It starts
It is
like
a crime story.
it is a crime story.
It's a global crime story.
Yeah, but then chapter 7 was lovely because all you do there is, did these Germans come to find about Aryan race? Did these Germans come to find about, no, did they come to find about, weakness on India's eastern border from where Germany could prepare an attack? But they had actually come to find about the Aryan race. And, but the kind of details you get in, and this is where my question is, how did you conduct the research for it? Garrulus Hitler spoke so much. How did you sit and find India in everything he spoke? You mentioned you researched in German archive, British, Indian archive, but can we say that your book covers almost, say, 70% of Hitler's mention of India in everything? Or does it cover even more than that? I mean, how do you do a research for this kind of work? How many places has Hitler mentioned India? What has each of them meant? What is the pattern they have formed? And here is a book on that pattern. I mean, imagine how much work that is.
Well, I think it's important to detect the pattern more than count the number of times he has mentioned and take care to mention each and every time he has made that reference to India. But a pattern clearly emerged from the archives that I went through. Now, I had to look at German archives in great detail. Thousands of,
in India or in Germany?
Thousands of pages, actually. In Germany, mostly. Now, I must say, I did not go to Germany. But because we live in this age where, everything can be available and can be sent to us on this thing called the computer, I got in touch with some of the big museums there, some of the big archives there, and they have a number of archival institutions. So there is the Bundesarchiv, where they have most of the documents related to the Third Reich. I got in touch with them, got them to send me all these very yellowed German documents from the Third Reich from the 1933 onwards. And I had to go through all of those documents, get them translated, look at where a discussion about India and the British Raj had taken place. What was the relevance of that discussion? Did it needed to be mentioned? Did it indicate some sort of pattern? So all of that I had to get translated. then there were pre-Nazi Germany documents that I had to look at, Amandeep. Because, like I said at the beginning, Hitler spoke quite a bit about India during his years in the opposition in Weimar, Germany. After the World War, there are documents related to the Nazi Party from the early 1920s, in fact, even 1919. That was the earliest I found, where he talks about India. And those documents are not in the public realm. They are not in his published works or writings. They are certainly not in his translated works.
Then
So
where
they're
are
all
they?
they're not a lot of the material is not in available in English. So those early Nazi Party documents where he made his early speeches, where minutes were taken of Nazi meetings and of all these beer hall meetings where he spoke. I had to go through all of that, get all the stuff translated, look at that. And of course, I had to look at the Indian responses to Hitler as well. So, like I mentioned to you, Bose's protests, Bose's letters to Hitler and the Nazi leadership, Indian students' organizations' letters and protests, references to Hitler in Indian newspapers, protests against Hitler made by Indian newspaper readers to the editors of those newspapers. Those were Indian archives. Writings by Nehru, Ambedkar, Savarkar, Golwalkar, and practically just about everybody. Gandhi, who interestingly gets a lot of flack for saying some complimentary things about Hitler and his regime in its early years, and even closer to the war, when
Even
the
telling
Jews
the
actually criticize him a lot for saying some complimentary things and also for suggesting that they should use non-violence against Hitler.
I know. I mean,
There is all of that detail in the book that how they should use non-violence. So these Jews are asking, do you even know how Hitler responds if we talk the language of non-violence? So Gandhi's works and also responses to Gandhi from Jewish scholars of that time, writing about the Nazi era, who were very angry with Gandhi's remarks. All of that had to be brought in. Bose's writings, speeches, letters, his interactions with Nazi officials. Then the recording of the meeting between Hitler and Bose, written by Hitler's interpreter. Now, I wanted to look at it in the original because I didn't just want to go by Hitler's biographies or by Bose's biographies, because they mention only in snatches those conversations. But I wanted to get a sense of the full conversation and get an idea, a drift of the conversation, which I was able to get only because I went through that entire record of that conversation, that 1 hour conversation, which is about 8 pages written in German. Out of which Hitler's ramblings take up 7 pages, and Bose's talk takes up 1 page.
No, but
sorry. So that was there, and also just to finish, I had to look at the British records as well, including the British parliamentary records of the time, not just the press records, because when Indians were persecuted and arrested and prosecuted and thrown out of Nazi Germany, ordinary Indians like students, political agitators, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial fighters, when they were thrown out of Germany because they were inferior and some of them were suspected to be communists, there were some well-meaning British parliamentarians who raised the issue in the British Parliament, and it became a political hot potato at that point in time between Britain and Germany, at least within Britain certainly, because the government of the time came under a lot of pressure, because some British parliamentarians were saying, look at what's happening. Indians were British subjects at the time. And they said that we must protest against this. So I had to look at the British archives, or the British parliamentary archives as well. So thousands of pages, in short.
No, but not only thousands.
Which is why it took 10 years.
No, yeah, but you produced another book in the middle of the 10 years. So that is also there.
Yeah.
No, but I think they were in some ways complementary. The Savarkar book would have gained by you working on the Hitler book,
Yes. And the other way too. Yeah. The other way around.
Yeah. But I have a very mundane question. I'm sorry if people feel offended, but translation. Did you pay for all that?
I paid from my own pocket for it, and it costs me a lot. I mean, I don't know to.
German rates, Indian rates.
Sorry?
German rates or Indian
Well,
rates?
I tried to negotiate somewhere in between,
My God.
but
Hello.
I spent on my own. I did not have a scholarship or anything to go by.
That is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
please, folks, buy the book. Get back the money to whoever. Yeah,
At least for that reason, if not for anything else.
yeah. No. For many other good reasons. And the one of the best reasons I found is the organization of chapters. How did you arrive at that? It's not fully linear. Like Bose comes in twice.
Yeah.
And you divide Bose into two, which is I loved it. Like you're not throwing a whole lot of information about one thing at a time. You stagger it around. Like so. How did you work out the chapterization of the book?
Okay, now when I respond to this question of yours, Amandeep, I would also like to respond to another point that you made right at the beginning, that I'm not giving out my opinion. It looks like, it's the, I'm being this journalist who is just recording things. So I was very clear from the beginning that I had to tell this story, a story that is completely forgotten in India, which is like a gaping hole in Indian history writing. And this story needs to be told, and the story needs to be told in an engaging manner and not in a dry manner that will put off the general reader, because this book is for the general reader as much as it is for anyone else. And I believe in the narrative saying everything. So, which is my answer to your point that I was being a journalist. Now, when I am putting out a certain narrative, it does not mean I'm not giving out my opinion. The narrative itself is my opinion, and the narrative is my interpretation. So, my interpretation comes in the narrative. As the very famous historian E.H. Carr said, that facts are interpretation. Facts themselves are interpretation, because suppose I'm going through thousands of documents about the Third Reich. As a researcher and writer, I will pick a certain number of documents. Now that selection of documents itself is an interpretation. People might think, the readers might think that I have selected facts and put them here. No, but that selection itself shows that I'm interpreting those things. I could very well have selected just a couple of quotes that Hitler, that are attributed correctly to Hitler at the start of the Second World War, when he realized that in spite of his wooing of Britain had gone to war against him. He made a couple of remarks against British rule in India, all of a sudden, which ran counter to what he was saying all through. And later again, he went back to his original position that the Indians were a worthless people. But in the middle, he does say a couple of things which are there in my book. But if I had taken only those and portrayed that as Hitler's opinion of India, then that would have been my interpretation of Hitler as a pro-India leader. But I have not done that. So I am narrating a story which is completely forgotten. And by giving those details, I'm offering my own interpretation through the narrative. And that is my response to the question that I haven't offered my opinion. Well, this is my opinion. The book itself and the facts and material gathered there, they are my opinion. Because otherwise, Amandeep, I would have ended up writing a polemical text. And I did not want to make it a polemical text. It's not about my lecture. It's about what does history reveal. This is what history reveals. And there is a pattern, and the pattern is unmistakably clear.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I mean, but that to me is better writing, where you are not sitting and saying good or bad. You're showing things, and people understand exactly what you want to say.
Absolutely, yeah.
If I have your permission, can I bring in Karthik here? Because I would want to hear from him.
Has played the biggest role in bringing this book out. And it's because of him that it has seen the light of day, actually.
Yeah,
and he's a beautiful editor. He edited it beautifully. And if it's really looking compact, it's all because of him.
Yeah, Karthik, can you come in, please?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Karthik.
Hello.
See, I'm just taking the pleasure of one editor meeting two of his writers. So that's my simple thing. But you know my question on chapterization, right? And you heard me talk about the book, about how I think it is just there. It doesn't, push the audience into a direction, but the audience automatically goes in that direction. And you heard Vaibhav say that, of course, the selection of everything to go into the book itself was, there is a method to it. There's no doubt about that. Uh, who is? Please, can we unmute Vaibhav also, please? Yeah. So, but how did you find working on the book? Did you cut it as much as you cut my book? It's, you threw out 1/4 of my book, like so, and how was it to work on a text like this? It is also your passion area, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, working on historical narratives is always a labor of love, because you are learning so much, and someone like me who loves history, loves historical narratives, unearthing facts. Vaibhav's book was fascinating because when we got the proposal, we knew we had to acquire it. We had to acquire it quickly, so we moved very quickly to acquiring the book. There wasn't too much to cut in terms of editing out stuff. I don't think we did too much of that, if I'm right, Vaibhav. I don't think I cut out stuff as much as, with Vaibhav's consent, we rearranged things a little bit, to make openings of chapters more dramatic, to get the reader's curiosity, the reader's blood racing. That whole Nambiar thing was designed to kind of pick reader's curiosity in terms of what is this? Why are they doing all this? Why are they beating this guy up? Why are they talking rubbish to him? We wanted to kind of get that kind of interpretation to begin with, so that people would read more and more and more and more. So that dramatic opening was something Vaibhav and I discussed, and we did very deliberately. That we should start like that, like a James Bond movie starts very dramatically. So that was something that we discussed. Then I think another layer that we added to the book later on, which perhaps wasn't there in the original proposal, was the whole Tibet thing, and that Tibet thing, and German women wanting to go to Ladakh to find pure Aryans there were still there apparently. So those were some of the things that we added to the book later on, to bring the story down to the present day in terms of how it has influenced people's minds.
Right.
And while we thought we'd covered a lot of stuff, Vaibhav and I were just talking a couple of days back. One or two stories have still emerged, right? I mean, Vaibhav, that story of this Indian who was from French Mahe, part which is in Kerala, who was shot by the French Nazis in France. Executed. That story came out days ago.
Yes.
That was something that we were just talking. I wish we'd known. We'd have put that in the book as well, because again, it's a kind of a meeting of the Nazi party under Hitler and an Indian who was actually shot, who was executed.
Right. My one question, and then we'll go to audience, is this is to Vaibhav about Karthik, my personal. So Karthik has this way in which he edits, where you have really, really sweated it out and explained everything, and then says, "What does it mean?" It would get my goat. It would really don't you understand what does it mean? But you actually think about it 2 days later, and you realize you missed something that needed to be brought in the front. Did that happen with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It did in a number of places, and it's a sign of a brilliant editor. And I must tell you, I had another reaction in addition to the one you had, because I work as an editor with the Times of India, as one of the editors at the Times of India. And I often, every day, I am asking our correspondents, my colleagues, what is this? What is this? And, and I feel to myself that they must be thinking, why does he ask these fundamental questions? When an editor asks these questions, as an editor, oneself, that, okay, there are some very fundamental questions that a writer can indeed miss out on, and a familiarity with the subject makes you feel that, you've explained everything.
Right.
But that is why you need an editor. And it's the sign of a very good editor to ask very basic questions. And like Somerset Maugham said, there are no silly questions. There are only silly answers. So ever since I read that Maugham quote, I've not been afraid of asking questions myself of correspondents in our newspaper. And I'm also happy to answer everything. But Karthik asks, the most important thing about Karthik, he truly asks very pertinent questions. Very important, which are extremely important, and gaps that needed to be filled were filled brilliantly because of his intervention.
Right. No, and then there were times when I would call him up and I'll say, you know this, right? He said, yeah, I know it. I said, then why are you asking? And he would go silent, That basically means that I haven't said it. Okay. Sanjay sir had some question. His hand is raised. I'm sorry, sir. This is a fascinating book. We got carried away.
Hello. Hi, Mr. Purandare, Karthik, and hello, my friend Mandeep. I really have a bunch of questions. I haven't read the book. I hope to read it. But I'm interested in the fact that you've been researching from the Bundestag and the other libraries, but you have had to find translators, right? You said, isn't that, please hear my three questions and then please answer all of them, because I have read this area a lot because my uncle, Dr. Nirod Barua, whose work you may have seen, who has actually 3 books, or maybe 4, on Germany and the Indians, the most recent one, India in the official Germany. There was 77, Chapter of the Lives and Times of an Anti-Imperialist in Europe, and the book on Furtwängler in India, who was an anti-Nazi trade union leader and was sentenced to death but survived. So much of what
hasn't your uncle, if I'm not mistaken, your uncle has written about Virendranath Chattopadhyay.
Chatto, yeah, the book Chatto, because he also talks about Nambiar in the book.
Right.
He met Nambiar.
Right.
He met a lot, many of these figures. Now, did you talk to Subhash Chandra Bose's family in Cologne, Anita Bose? Did you manage to speak to her? That's the second question. The third is a comment, because I'm listening to what you're saying about Subhash Chandra Bose, and that is, of course, a challenge for all of us. Do the ends justify the means? He's waiting for Mr. Hitler, Herr Hitler, for all these years, and finally going to, and many would say the ends do justify the means, but I believe more in what Gandhi said, that the ends do not justify the means. So I would really like to hear a response on these points, and also whether you were not able to access the Heritage Museum in St. Petersburg, right? Because that is where
I wasn't able.
Yeah, so Dr. Barua actually had access. One day he got a huge box of files from the Heritage Museum, and it's a treasure trove. And he's got personal archives going back, many years. I hope I've asked him to join us, but I don't know if he's there. So thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thanks, Amandeep, for listening.
Well, thanks a lot. Yes, you are right. I had to get a lot of stuff translated from the German original, and I had also to look for people who could translate it correctly for me, because a lot of the German is old German and not the 21st century German that we may be familiar with. So got stuff translated, and after that I also got it checked by some other Germans who are familiar with the period, to to have a second and third opinion on the subject. And I was fortunate that there were some German scholars who helped me in this regard. So I certainly did seek that kind of assistance. It was without that, this would have been impossible. This project would have been impossible. Second, did I speak to Anita Bose-Pfaff? No, I did not speak to her about this project. I had spoken to her some years ago when she had once come to Mumbai, and I interviewed her for the newspaper that I was then working for. And I did not get, honestly, too much material out of her. So I did speak to her, but I did not get in touch with her again for this subject, because I had already discussed the subject with her, and she says she was too small. When I had first interacted with her some years ago, that is even before I had started to work on my book, when I had raised the subject of Bose's visit to Germany and all of that, she responded saying that she was too small to understand anything. She was 2 years old when he disappeared, when he went missing. But she was extremely gracious and highly respectful towards Gandhi and Nehru. We may be under the impression that, Bose's daughter may have some sort of bitterness about Gandhi and Nehru. She does not have that at all.
It was Nehru who made sure that she got a pension.
That's right.
And there are many people who are anti-Nehru who won't even like to recognize it.
Right.
And it's in Nambier's papers and all that.
No, absolutely. You are absolutely
Nehru specially sought her out and made sure she got a pension from the government of India.
Yes, I've come across those details that it was Nehru who actually got the pension for her. So she is, of course, grateful for that. And whether we have to look at it in terms of value judgments, yes, we have to. There's no question about the fact that seeking a friendship with Hitler was ultimately a disastrous thing. There's no doubt about that. And Bose's experience in itself turned out to be a disaster in Nazi Germany. So contrary to our perception that he had a very successful time in Germany, and the fact that the meeting between him and Hitler was a momentous one, it was not a momentous meeting. And that is also what my book brings out, that for Hitler it was not a momentous meeting, and even for the cause of Indian independence it was not a momentous meeting. And my only point that I have sought to make in this book very clearly is that, of course, Bose misjudged Hitler. There's no question about the fact that he misjudged Hitler. But so did almost every prominent Indian leader of the time across the political spectrum. So Gandhi initially has these misconceptions about Nazi Germany and about Hitler. Tagore has these wrong impressions about Mussolini and his Italy.
I think if Mr. Purandran, if I may come in, Gandhi actually said to Nehru, wrote a letter to Hitler saying that you are in a position to change the history of the world. I urge you not to resort to violence. I mean, it's an empty plea.
I have mentioned that letter.
Yeah, because he didn't ask him to follow non-violence. He said,
absolutely. But so before he issues that letter, he makes a lot of mistakes with regards to Nazi Germany, and he praises some of the work that Nazi Germany is doing, and he gets very angry responses, not just from the Jews initially, but even from others, and later on from the Jews from 1938 onwards. And of course, the letters that he wrote to Hitler are very much there; they are a part of my book. But then he also advises the British to give up their land, their homes, to vacate their properties, to give up their money if the Nazis enter London and English territory, and to submit themselves to Hitler. So all of those mistakes, that is pure naivety. Absolutely. So
and one thing before Amandeep, before
I think that we need to get in a couple of other questions.
Can I have just one question?
I think we need to get in.
Can I just ask this one question? this is, what you've said, Mr. Purandar, is very important. And I think it's extremely important that we listen to this and read it very carefully. But the question I have is, in your book, have you referred to the India League and the role that Chatto and all these others? Because
yes, absolutely.
Those had a very fascinating.
Chatto is a very prominent figure. Chatto is a very prominent figure in this book, and not only in this book of mine, by the way, but also in my biography of Savarkar. Because he's a very important Indian personality, a key personality of our freedom movement.
Who ended up being shot by the Russians.
By Stalin. By Stalin. Yeah.
Okay, there is just one question I have, Weber, from you, is that it's very interesting that you write about times, various periods, whether it is Thackeray or it is Savarkar or it is Tendulkar or it is now Hitler, through one person, by making one, through a biographical, genre, do you think it is the best approach to talking about a time? What do you feel about it? Why do you choose that approach?
So there are two reasons for this. One is that we dismissed we dismissed not just the great man theory of history under the influence of Marxist historiography, but we completely dismissed the idea of individuals being important in the larger scheme of things. And because of the influence of Marxist historiography, most of our scholars thought that we should not write about individuals. We should write about impersonal forces, because they are the only ones guarding, or guiding events. Now, there is no doubt that impersonal forces guide events, but at the same time, personalities do, and big personalities do. And we have a serious shortage of biography writing in India.
Right.
And we have too many subjects which haven't been tackled. For instance, Savarkar, and for instance, Hitler in India. So these were gaps that I saw, and I wanted to fill those gaps. These were important personalities. They had to be written about in order to understand India, in order to understand India's past and present.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure to me personally. I mean, I got to read the book just a few days back, then got to talk to Weber. And thank you so much, Weber. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Sanjay sir. Thank you, Preeti, for hosting us.
Thank you, Amandeep, and thank you, Preeti, very much for inviting me. And thanks, Karthik. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to Maja House.
Yeah.